Today I'm sharing with you my top 5 favorite fall decor DIYs. I created each one of these decor pieces with Mod Podge, so you know they'll be easy to create, customizable to your taste and decorating style, and very affordable. So let's get started with number 1. The Dollar Tree has such a wide variety of wood shapes. I selected this wood pumpkin, and it's going to be the base for my sign. The first thing I'm going to do is get some spray paint. I chose a chiffon chalk paint, and I'm going to spray the front of this pumpkin. I'm going to make sure it's really saturated, let it dry, then I flipped it over and I painted the other side. The reason why I painted this pumpkin is because I wanted it to be one solid color. I'm putting some vellum paper over the top, and there are portions of this paper that you can see through. So I wanted to make sure that everything was cohesive underneath. This vellum paper is from Michael's, and it was 69 cents a piece. I got 2. And what I'm going to do with this paper is I'm going to Mod Podge it on top of my pumpkin. One piece wasn't large enough, so I needed 2. I taped them together, placed my pumpkin on top of the paper, and I traced it out. Then once I had that shape, I cut it out. Then I removed the tape, so I had 2 pieces. Next, I got a sponge brush and my Mod Podge, and I added a liberal amount to the surface of my wood pumpkin. Then I got my vellum paper and I placed it carefully on top of the pumpkin so that it would line up perfectly. And then I got that second piece and I made sure that the design lined up perfectly. Then I got my kitchen scraper and I pressed the vellum paper firmly to the pumpkin. Using a kitchen scraper gets any of those air bubbles out and make sure that the paper is really smooth and flat against your surface. I let the bottom portion of Mod Podge dry for about an hour, and then I put the top layer on. Again, I added a liberal amount to the entire surface of the pumpkin, and then I let it dry completely. To tie my pumpkins together, I'm going to use that same white tool that I used on my thrifted pumpkin. I'm going to wrap it around the stem of this pumpkin and simply tie it in a bow. For an added bit of pizzazz, I'm going to get a hair bow. Yes, it's a hair bow. And I found it at Hobby Lobby, and I used my 40% off coupon, so it was really affordable. What I'm gonna do with this is that it has that clip, that little clamp. I'm going to clamp the metal piece right to the center of my bow, and it will stay in place. In the center of my pumpkin, I'm putting the word thankful. This came from the Dollar Tree. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to spray paint it gold, the same gold that I used on my votive candle holder. That way, again, it ties my whole design together. I sprayed a thick coat of paint over the top of my thankful sign, and then I let it dry completely. To attach my thankful to my pumpkin, I got some hot glue. I added hot glue to the back of my wording, and then I placed it in the center of my pumpkin. I love the message of this pumpkin. Fall to me evokes gratitude and thankfulness, and so this pumpkin is a great reminder for us to be thankful. Using tier trays is one of my favorite ways to decorate for the changing holidays and seasons. The way that I'm going to decorate mine is with a lot of fall embellishments. The first one is going to be a sign. Now, this sign started out as a Halloween sign, and I got it at the Dollar Tree. I'm going to remove that paper front. I'll take the corner and just pull it all the way off. The reason why I'm doing this is because it had a bow on it. So if I were to put paper over it, it would be lumpy and bumpy. My recommendation is that if you are changing a sign out and it has some embellishments on it, some sparkles, some glitter, some raised parts, just remove that part first so you can put the second paper on and it will be smooth. If you don't have any embellishments on, leave it as is, skip that step, and then you can just put your paper right over the top. Once the Halloween paper was removed, I got a piece of light grit sandpaper and sanded down the edges and the top just to make sure that it was really smooth. The black color of the sign wasn't going to work for my fall decor either, so I'm going to spray paint it using this Rust-Oleum white spray paint. I did 2 coats to make sure that it was saturated and you couldn't see any of the black coming through, and then I let it dry completely. At this point, it's time to add a new sign. I found this pretty pumpkin sign online and it is free. Yay, we love free things. So if you like this printable, I will leave a link to where I found it in my description box below, and you can have it too. After I printed it off, I cut it into a 6 by 6 inch square, and now it's time to adhere it. I'm using Mod Podge and a sponge brush. I'm going to add the Mod Podge to the top surface of my sign. Then I'm going to carefully line up my paper sign so it's evenly placed on the center. Then I took my kitchen scraper and pressed the sign and paper together. The scraper tool helps remove any bubbles that may be trapped under the paper, and it smooths it out. Once everything was adhered, I let it dry for about an hour before adding the top layer of Mod Podge. Again, I added a liberal amount of Mod Podge to the top surface of my sign, and then I let it dry completely, which was a few hours. It was so easy to take this Halloween themed sign and transform it into a fall themed sign. It was, of course, very affordable because all I did was get that Dollar Tree sign, Mod Podge, and some paper. I really think that adding customizable pieces to your decorations make them look so much more high-end. I'm going to be taking a dusty thrifted vase and some Dollar Tree pumpkins. I'm going to be transforming them into some beautiful blue and white chinoiserie home decor pieces that are perfect for a classy fall display. First up, I needed to find a vase for my display. Now, I love thrifting because you can find such unique pieces there, and they're usually pretty affordable. I needed a vase that was square or had a flat front because I was going to be Mod Podging onto mine, and the flat surfaces make it easier to Mod Podge onto. Luckily for me, I found one that had a flat front and a flat back, and it was only $2.99. After a good washing, I let it dry completely, and now it's prepped to be transformed. The way I'm going to do that is with some Mod Podge and some beautiful blue and white floral napkins that I found at HomeGoods. These napkins are so pretty, and they were only $2.99, which is a great deal. One thing that I love about Mod Podge is that it is so versatile. It can be used with tissue paper, it can be used with napkins, which is what we're doing today. I've used Mod Podge with wrapping paper and scrapbook paper, so Mod Podge is a great option if you're really wanting to transform something. My napkins are 2-ply napkins, so I needed to remove the back layer. The reason why I'm doing this is because if I were to put the napkin on as is, that back layer is what would adhere to the vase, but the top layer wouldn't. And when I go to put the top layer on the outside of my vase, it would only adhere to the outside of the napkin and not to the back. So I needed to remove the back layer, which left me with the top blue and white floral layer. Also, another reason why I do that is because air can get trapped in between the layers, which would make your finished product look a little more wavy and get bubbles in it. So it's important to remove, when it comes to napkins, remove that back layer. I liberally painted on the Mod Podge with a sponge brush to the front portion of my vase. Then I got my napkin and I placed it carefully over the top of the vase, and then I smoothed it out. Because the napkin is so thin, it will tear easily once it's placed onto the wet Mod Podge, so use light pressure to press it onto the vase. Then once that was finished, I flipped it over to the other side and I added again a liberal amount of Mod Podge. I got my second napkin and I placed it over the top, and again I used light pressure to adhere the napkin to the vase. I trimmed off the excess napkin around the edges so there was no overhang and the napkin would lay flat. I did have one small empty spot on my vase, which was not a problem. All I did was I took a little sliver of that napkin and I placed it over the top of that empty spot and Mod Podged over it. After I was finished, I let it dry completely, which was a couple of hours. Now the reason why I'm doing that is because that napkin is so thin. If I added the top layer on right now, it would just tear it right off. So it needs to dry and firm up before you put the top layer on. I liberally added a top layer of Mod Podge to the entire surface of the vase, and then I let it dry completely, which for me was overnight. And now it's ready to be filled with some beautiful blue and white florals. I love this transformation. This vase right here got an easy and affordable makeover that makes it look so high-end. These plastic pumpkins are from the Dollar Tree. They have so many options there of sizes and shapes. I decided to go with a smaller pumpkin because they were going to be an accent piece on my display. So the first thing that I needed to do was pull out the stem. The reason why I'm pulling out the stem first is because when I go to adhere the napkins to the pumpkin, it will adhere smoother without the stem, without working around the stem. And so I pulled it out. It just slid right out. I didn't have to pull very hard. It came right out. I'm going to cut my napkin into strips for this pumpkin because the strips will lay flatter and adhere better to a curved surface as opposed to just one giant napkin. You'll have a lot of bunching and bubbling if you do it that way. So I cut my napkins into about 1.5 inch strips. Now I did forget to take the backing off the napkin before I cut it, so save yourself some time and remember to remove that bottom layer before you cut it. Once everything was cut and I had my strips, I put the Mod Podge all over my pumpkin. Again, I used my sponge brush and I applied it liberally. Then I got my napkin strips and I started at the top and I smoothed it out towards the bottom. I did have some overlapping parts on the edges. It was okay, it looked fantastic. I'd rather have a little bit of an overlap as opposed to some pumpkin underneath that was shining through, so a little bit of overlap is okay. Once my pumpkin was completely covered, I moved on to my second pumpkin. I repeated the process of adding the Mod Podge and then adding the strips of napkin. Once everything was covered, I let these pumpkins dry again for a couple of hours because the napkin was so thin. I wanted to make sure that it was completely dry before I added the top layer of Mod Podge. I brushed on a generous layer of that Mod Podge to the top surface of my pumpkins, and then I let them dry overnight. To replace the stem, I got a wooden skewer and I poked it into the original hole that the stem was in, which gave me an access point so I knew exactly where it was, and then I just pushed that stem right back in. And that's it. These were so easy and affordable to make, and they will up the elegant factor on my display. Up next is a pumpkin planter box that again is from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to recreate it into a picture frame easel. I'm going to start off by staining it. I'm going to use the same stain that I used before, the ebony Minwax stain, the really dark, rich stain. I got a sponge brush and I painted the stain onto the pumpkin planter. From the back sides, I did the front. All of it was done with my sponge brush. And then when it was fully covered in the stain, I wiped off the excess with a paper towel and then I let it dry completely. To spookify this pumpkin even further, I'm going to Mod Podge on some spider webs. I'm going to create these spider webs out of some gold wrapping paper and a Martha Stewart spiderweb punch. You can find these online at Amazon, and they were really fun to make. I just punched them out and super cheap. Great way to customize some seasonal decor. I trimmed up my spider webs into some uneven pieces of web so that they would fit on the front of my pumpkin. Then I got out some Mod Podge and a sponge brush. I painted a liberal amount of Mod Podge onto the pumpkin, and then I placed the web into the Mod Podge. After all of my webs were down, I got a kitchen scraper and I pressed those webs firmly into the Mod Podge, and then I let it dry for about an hour before doing the top layer. Again, I got my sponge brush and a liberal amount of this Mod Podge, and I put it over the entire surface of this pumpkin. Now, if you haven't worked with Mod Podge before, don't worry about the cloudy appearance right now. The Mod Podge will dry clear.